Joining me on stage here just now, on my right, we have Dr. Owen Rogers from the 451 Research Group. And Owen will tell us a bit about 451 in a moment, in particular about their cloud codex and their pricing research they do. And I also have Matthew Hatton. Matthew is Director of the Technology Reset Programme at the Home Office. Matthew's going to explain a little bit about what that means, what the remit is there in just a second. You will be aware that at the Home Office we have Denise McDonough, who's, I believe Matthew was telling me that yesterday was the first day of her replacement in office as Chief Technology Officer, but Denise, obviously in previous years, was here on stage as the successor to Chris, prior to Tony taking over as the G-Code Programme Director. So Denise is retiring, we wish her well, but let's get back to pricing for a second or two. So Owen, do you want to start by just explaining a little bit about 451 Research, what you do, type of clients you have, and what your particular area of specialism is?
Sure. Afternoon. I'm Owen Rogers. I'm Senior Analyst for Digital Economics at 451 Research. 451 Research is the third largest tech industry analyst firm by publication. And we have around 100 analysts all around the world, based in New York, but we have a substantial presence in London as well. My specific role in the company is to investigate areas of economics in the cloud world. So these include things like price, cost, and competitive differentiation. As I'm sure you've all discovered by now, the cloud pricing methodologies out there is a whole world of pain for end users to really get their head around. Cloud is far more than just virtual machines. There are a different bunch of services consumed by an application that might include databases, storage, support, etc., etc. So part of my role is really to help government agencies, enterprises, and service providers get through all this complexity of cloud pricing. And something we've recently come up with is the Cloud Price Index. So inflation is typically measured, as we all know, with a basket of groceries approach. We're trying to do the same in the cloud world. So we have a basket of typical type of cloud services. We've defined a textbook application that consumes all those services, and we've approached a bunch of cloud providers in the market, which roughly represent about 70% of the cloud market today. And by approaching these providers, we can establish a typical price for a cloud application. And that's about $1.70 per hour at the moment. So the Cloud Price Index is my big project, and that's pretty much what I work on all the time at the moment.
Okay, so we'll come back onto the price index in a moment too. But first of all, Matt, do you want to explain a little bit about the Technology Reset Programme and where it sits inside the Home Office and what it's all about?
Sure. So the Reset Programme's brief within the Home Office is to deliver the next generation of core technology services to the Home Office user base. So what I mean by core is think end-user computing solutions, application hosting, the networks that link all that together, and the service integration that supports all of that once it's live. So that's the kind of scope in a nutshell. Why are we doing that? So our primary objective is to deliver a much better solution to our user base that, similar to what Stephen referred to earlier, we have some quite out-of-date technology solutions in terms of what Home Office staff are using to do their job on a day-to-day basis. From a technology perspective, it is slightly about cost, so we are trying to reduce our operational costs. We are trying to reduce the cost of change. But it's also about control and flexibility, so we will take on more control through this process. We will take on, as I say, the system and service integration function across the department. And we will take increasing control of the design in some aspects of the solution. So it is very much about cost, but it is also about those things. From a commercial perspective, we will move away from our large IT outsource contracts in effect. So the relevance for cloud is obviously we will be working directly with a number of suppliers, some of those cloud suppliers, some commodity technology service providers through other frameworks. In order to build that overall solution set. I've talked a little bit about what we're trying to achieve. Where is G-Cloud helpful in that? So obviously it's about commercially procuring commodity products.
Yeah.
So that's where it's very useful to us. But it has a much greater enabling effect for us. So it enables our overall approach. We're working very closely with GDS to learn lessons from a very recent implementation in the Cabinet Office of similar scope. And also just practically, how do you apply agile principles and methodology to a large infrastructure program in government? And I think G-Cloud really supports that through kind of lowering the cost of failure, meaning you can do things at a small scale quite quickly, and get things moving, test things out, iterate, improve. So as well as lowering cost, it has a much greater enabling effect.
And I guess it's perhaps hardly surprising with Denise in situ that the Home Office is consistently the biggest buyer through the G-Cloud. You're always at the top of the tree at any given time. In terms of SME engagement, we've talked about that a lot this morning, and I know that's something that you talked there about the sort of dismantling of the big SI contracts. Presumably there's more SME engagement going on now than there ever has been before.
There is. I think for the Home Office, we do very much support the SME agenda, and we do want to work with SMEs. The scale of the Home Office means that sometimes you still need a large supplier as well, so it is very much a mixed economy for us, simply because of the scale, I think. But we are already working with a number of small suppliers through G-Cloud, some of which are in this room. Often that's about providing the skills and capability that we don't currently have. So you can get a sense from what I've talked about already. The transformation within the Home Office technology team is huge in order to be able to operate and continue to make the best of that disaggregated solution set and disaggregated commercial environment.
Okay. So Owen, you guys obviously look at private sector and public sector organisations. There are particular challenges facing public sector organisations, presumably. Have you isolated any of those?
Yeah, so obviously as a research organisation, we survey end users throughout the world in a variety of different sectors. And what regularly comes out on top is the fact that it's normally the non-IT roadblocks that are the real barriers to cloud adoption. I think cloud technology is certainly getting more mature. I don't think it's as mature as it can be, but all the barriers to adoption are the things around procurement, managing efficiently, choosing the best value cloud provider. And to me, all of these are associated with moving from the capital model to the operating model. In the government sector particularly, there is an allocation of budget. I don't think there is quite a conservative attitude, I would argue, towards risk-taking and expenditure. And I think for the government sector in particular to move from capital, well-understood, predictable costs into the on-demand world of cloud, where pretty much anyone with a credit card can consume as many resources as they want, where virtual machines can be left on overnight accidentally, creating a financial liability. I think all of this move from understood to completely unpredictable and variable presents a lot of risks. And in government, I think that risk is very large. With
the Home Office, with the program that you're involved with, Matt, where does G-Cloud go from here? Because we've heard a lot this morning about we're in a state of some transition with G-Cloud. It's made it into the mainstream of government. There's bits of it being spun off into the digital services framework. Where do you see G-Cloud going inside Home Office?
So a number of points on that, if I may. First, I would say there is something in maturing the existing services that are available through the G-Cloud. I think we'd all recognise we're not at full maturity of the G-Cloud marketplace at the moment. So an example from our perspective might be PaaS there. So in terms of that greater control and flexibility that I talked about, from a hosting perspective, portability is a really important requirement for us. At the moment, we're using mostly IaaS. Our view is that we need to take more control of that solution stack in order to really make sure we get the most portability. Possibly in the future, we could increase the commodity nature of the PaaS market, so that would give organisations like the Home Office confidence we could implement a PaaS solution and still have that ability to move to another supplier if technology moves on, or if the performance of that supplier is not what we want it to be.
So I know you were saying earlier that a large part of the solution stack that you need, you can't actually get through the G-Cloud in its present form.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the other points I'd like to make. So there's maturing the current services, but also providing additional services through, if not the G-Cloud, then a very similar mechanism. So from my perspective, sat on top of a really big program, clearly some of those components we can buy in the way that's been discussed here. Some of them we can't, and that presents me with a problem both from a kind of solution integration perspective, but also from a planning and business case and management perspective, because some things you can do quickly and you can iterate, and some things you still have to do almost in the old model, and trying to integrate that, as I say, from a solution perspective and a management perspective is a big challenge.
Obviously, central government benefits from the cloud-first mandate, which means you've got to have a look at a cloud solution in the first instance. But there's still cultural and people challenges. It's, lead a horse to water, but can you make it drink? How far has the culture changed inside the Home Office, do you think?
So that's probably our biggest challenge. As I say, we do use a lot of G-Cloud services to support us through that. Obviously, Home Office technology is mostly an assurance-based function at the moment, and we need to turn that into an organisation that's able to carry out the full life cycle right the way through to operate of services in a disaggregated world, work directly with suppliers, own the design, understand the design, so that you can take control of your technology estate. So the people change and the transformation within Home Office technology is the biggest challenge within the programme, I think.
So, Owen, from an analyst firm point of view, give us some recommendations. What do we need to do to make government more accepting of cloud, or to make the adoption easier?
I think, I suppose a lot of the onus is on consumers to really understand what they're getting into, and to fight more from the service providers to deliver what they expect. I know that's easy for me to say. Essentially, I think consumers need to sit down before signing a contract, before choosing a particular supplier, and ask the really difficult questions before they get involved with something. So these questions might be, okay, I'll scale up, but who will take responsibility for paying that bill? If I scale down, will the costs I would have spent be relinquished back to me? If I want to migrate to a different provider later on, or a different supplier, how much will that cost? Who will help me? And I think there needs to be a lot of best and worst case scenario analysis. What's the best that can happen? What's the worst? And who will take ownership of those problems? And there's nothing wrong with taking all those issues to the service provider and saying, how do you propose you will solve these challenges?
So that doesn't sound like commodity purchasing to me. That's not me going onto iTunes and buying something. Is there genuinely commodity purchasing that can still go on inside government, or do we need to sit down and haggle?
I think it depends on what the service is. I think virtual machines and storage, I would argue to some degree they are commoditized, because they are very similar between providers. It's the combination of managed services and SLAs and the service wrap built on top of it that I would argue is where the value lies. Now, potentially, that's a place where consumers can make savings by choosing a simpler service. But I would argue it's probably better to go for the value-adding services, where you might be able to get guarantees and assurances around what you're actually committing to.
And contracts, I mean, I know this has been an issue that a lot of our legal colleagues have raised over the years, that cloud contracts just aren't quite as simple. There's a hell of a lot of small print in most contracts, and it is buyer beware, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you only have to look at the iTunes, iCloud contract to realise it's I mean, I've never read it, and I've signed up for iTunes. Again, I wonder how much, perhaps it's time to put the pressure on the service provider to make them simpler. Perhaps it is the time to say, I'm not using you, Mr. Service Provider, until you tell me exactly what this means, and you make it simpler, and you show where my liabilities are and where your liabilities are.
Well, I'm not sure that's something that we're going to solve today, but
let's give it a go.
It's a nice idea. Do you have any questions from the floor?
John Glover from Cahoots. We've been trialling some more innovative licensing schemes. It came out of pre-market engagement with Department of Health. They said, what happens if we get a health outbreak? You know, they'd had bird flu, obviously we've got Ebola now, and we get a spike in demand. And I was also speaking to the National Resilience Forum, same sort of thing, where they're trying to spin up services very, very quickly and connect stakeholders. But then once the furore goes down, it goes down. I think the problem they had was with the budgeting for those sorts of things. They're used to paying for utilities in that way, but not software. And so they said, how can we do that? Could we do a deal? I said, no, you've got to do it as a commodity. So we did actually come up with a licensing scheme to support that, which they like. And it's actually encouraging more use. I think they're still trying to get to grips with the process. So the question is, how much education do we have to do for the procurement people that this life is not about deal making anymore, it's about value and taking out waste? Because that's where the issue lies. Because I can come up with all the innovative technologies and licensing schemes, but the bureaucracy and the P2P systems that they've got in public sector and raising purchase orders for the extra one user they want that month, that's where the problem lies.
Either of you?
I think there's probably a nest of challenges within that question. I mean, I think you're absolutely right in terms of some of the processes and some of the change in attitudes almost that's required in some areas of government departments to fully leverage the technology innovation and some of the G-Cloud purchasing.
Owen, do you want to add anything?
I completely agree with you. I think the traditional IT model has been around for so long, and cloud, I know analysts like to use the term disruptive a lot, but cloud truly is disruptive. And because of that disruptive influence, it does mean there will be a lag before people who are used to dealing with the traditional IT model get used to the new way. And clearly education is one really great way of making sure that maturity in terms of implementation happens sooner.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you. Denise Walker from Maztec. My question's to Owen. Sorry, I was just a bit worried to hear you talk about liabilities in that last exchange about contracts, because my understanding is that one of the founding principles of G-Cloud is that the argument about liabilities is taken out of the header contract, meaning that then when you come to contract on a local basis, there are locally agreed T's and C's, which are all designed around the actual delivery. And that's part, I mean, certainly customers that we've had on G-Cloud love the fact that the time to contract is reduced considerably, because that whole noise just goes away for them under G-Cloud. So I just wanted to...
Yeah, I think liabilities probably wasn't the best term. I suppose I was meaning in a pay-as-you-go model, which could be on G-Cloud or anything. It is, in the traditional model, you would have a fixed number of licenses, a fixed infrastructure, so it was very easy to assure that from month to month you wouldn't spend over your budget. But I hear anecdotal stories of more of the major cloud providers in the enterprise world, where someone's been playing around on virtual machines, has accidentally spun up 20. Nobody's noticed until the end of the month that this has happened. And suddenly the CIO is wondering why they have a $20,000 bill to pay. And in that respect, that is a liability on the part of the enterprise, because they have to pay that, even though they didn't derive any value from it. So when I use liability, I suppose I was talking about financial risk rather than liability.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for that. And my other question is to Matthew. How do you choose between using G-Cloud versus some of the other frameworks such as DSF, or how will you have a set criteria for doing that, or? Yeah, so we have a commercial strategy, much of which has been discussed here. So obviously it's cloud first, and then there are certain frameworks for things like networks. So we have a clear laid out strategy. Obviously the preference is for things like G-Cloud, but there are some things that we, as I said earlier, we can't yet procure through this mechanism, where we have to fall back on more traditional approaches. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, with that, then, I will say thank you to our two speakers. And Owen, I've learnt one thing out of your presentation. I've always been calling it the 451 research and not 451, so I'll correct myself in future. But Matthew and Owen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.